My name is Zara, and at 35 years old, I built a $5 million empire from absolutely nothing. I spent 12 years sacrificing my youth, my sleep, and my personal life to turn Onyx Events into the premier luxury planning firm in Atlanta. I thought I was building a legacy for my family, but I was wrong. I was just building a piggy bank for them to smash open. Last Sunday, my mother, Loretta, looked me in the eye over a plate of collard greens and handed my entire company to my incompetent younger sister and her unemployed husband. My father, Otis, nodded and said I should be grateful to work under them because they needed the money more than I did. I didn't scream, and I didn't flip the table. I just smiled, took off my company watch, and walked out the door. They thought they had won, but they had no idea that they were sitting in a car with no brakes speeding toward a cliff. Before I tell you how I made them beg for my help, 3 months later, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to walk away from toxic family to save yourself. The air in my parents' dining room was thick enough to choke on. It was a humid Sunday in Atlanta, and the air conditioning in the colonial-style house I paid for was humming loudly, but it did nothing to cool the tension around the mahogany table. This was our weekly ritual. Sunday dinner, a performance of family unity that my mother Loretta insisted upon. She sat at the head of the table wearing one of her oversized church hats, even though we were indoors. My father Otis sat opposite her head, bowed over his plate, avoiding eye contact with everyone. To my left sat my younger sister Chantel, 30 years old, and still waiting for the world to hand her everything on a silver platter. Beside her was her husband Brad, a man who had tried and failed at 3 different get-rich-quick schemes in the last 2 years. I picked up my fried chicken, wondering how soon I could politely leave to check on the preparations for the senator's daughter's wedding next weekend. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but a sharp look from my mother stopped me from checking it. She picked up her crystal wine glass and tapped it with a silver spoon. The sharp ding silenced the room. Brad stopped chewing with his mouth open, and Chantel straightened up, looking smug. I should have known then that something was wrong. My mother loved an audience, and she loved control. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, the same tone she used to run the church auxiliary board. "Your father and I have been doing a lot of praying and thinking about the future of this family. We realize that things need to change. We need to ensure that everyone is taken care of." I nodded absently, assuming she was talking about another vacation or perhaps a renovation she wanted me to fund. I took a sip of water, waiting for the price tag. "Effective tomorrow morning," Loretta continued, her eyes locking onto mine with a steely glint. "We are restructuring Onyx Events. Brad and Chantel will be stepping up to take over the role of CEO and CFO respectively." I froze. The water glass stopped halfway to my mouth. I blinked, thinking I had misheard. I looked at my father, but he was studying his corn as if it held the secrets of the universe. "Excuse me," I said, my voice calm but tight. "What do you mean, take over?" "I am the CEO. I founded the company." "We know what you did, Zara," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "But you are tired. You work too much. And frankly, the company needs fresh energy. It needs a family focus. Chantel has the twins now. She needs stability. And Brad, well, Brad is a man. He needs a position of authority to properly lead his household." I set my glass down slowly. The condensation made a wet ring on the tablecloth. I looked at Brad. He was leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. This was a man who had lost $50,000 on cryptocurrency last month, money he had borrowed from me and never paid back. "You cannot be serious," I said, looking from my mother to my father. "Dad, say something." "I built this company from a laptop in your basement. I pulled us out of bankruptcy. This generates $5 million a year because of my client list and my reputation. You can't just give it to them." Otis finally looked up. His eyes were sad, but his jaw was set in that stubborn way I knew too well. "Zara, be reasonable. You are single. You have a nice apartment and a nice car. You don't need all that income. Chantel and Brad have a growing family. They have responsibilities that you simply don't understand. We have to look out for the ones who need it most. So because I chose to work instead of having children, I am being punished. I asked, my voice rising slightly. Because I am successful, I deserve to have my hard work stolen. It is not stealing, Loretta snapped. It is sharing. It is family. And you aren't being fired. We decided you will stay on as a senior consultant. You can handle the day-to-day logistics, while Brad focuses on the big picture strategy. You won't draw a salary for a while, of course, until Brad gets his feet wet, but you have plenty of savings. I looked at Chantel. She wasn't even looking at me. She was looking at her fingernails, looking bored. She had been the golden child her entire life, protected from every consequence, shielded from every hardship. I had worked double shifts to pay for her prom dress. I had paid her tuition when she decided to go to fashion school for a semester before dropping out. And now she was sitting there, waiting to inherit my life. Brad cleared his throat, and the sound grated on my nerves like sandpaper. Look, Zara, he said, his tone condescending and thick with unearned confidence. I know this is a shock, but honestly, your business model is outdated. You are too focused on the details. I have an MBA from an online program, and I have been reading a lot about scaling. I am going to modernize Onyx. We are going to automate everything. You are too emotional with the clients. I am going to bring some real corporate structure to this thing. I stared at him. This man had never planned anything more complex than a fantasy football draft. He thought event planning was just ordering flowers and food. He had no idea about the permits, the vendor negotiations, the crisis management, the ego-soothing required for the high-end clients we served in Atlanta. You think you can just step in and run a multi-million-dollar company? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Do you even know the login for the vendor portal? Do you know which florist requires a deposit 6 months in advance, and which one will work on credit because I saved his business 3 years ago? Details, Brad scoffed, waving his hand just like my mother. That is what you are there for. You handle the little stuff. I will handle the vision. I looked at my mother, expecting her to see the absurdity of this. She was a woman who cared about appearances above all else. Surely she knew that Brad would embarrass us. But she was looking at him with adoring eyes. She saw a man in a suit, and to her, that was enough. She wanted to be able to tell her friends at church that her son-in-law was a CEO. She wanted the picture-perfect family, even if it was a lie. This is final, Loretta said, her voice hard. The paperwork is already drawn up. We signed it this morning. And that was the moment the trap snapped shut. I remembered then. 12 years ago, when I started Onyx, I had bad credit because of student loans. My parents had co-signed the incorporation papers. On paper, technically, legally, Loretta was the majority shareholder. I had done the work. I had brought in the money. But she held the power. I had trusted them because they were family. I had never bothered to change the paperwork because I thought we were on the same team. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. It started in my chest and spread to my fingertips, numbing the anger, replacing it with something sharper, something more useful. They didn't want me. They wanted my output. They wanted the golden eggs, but they wanted to kill the goose because the goose was too loud and too independent. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. The room went silent. Sit down, Zara, my father said nervously. Do not make a scene. I am not making a scene, I said. My voice was steady, so steady it surprised me. I reached down to my wrist and unclasped the vintage Rolex I wore. It was a gift from the company accounts, a bonus I had given myself after landing the governor's inauguration contract last year. I placed it gently on the table next to the untouched mashed potatoes. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the key fob to the company Porsche. I placed that on the table too. Finally, I took out my company credit card and slid it across the lace tablecloth until it rested in front of Brad. What are you doing? Chantel asked, her voice shrill. You are supposed to help us. You are the consultant. No, I said. I am not. If you are the CEO, Brad, and you are the CFO, Chantel, then you don't need me. You have the vision, right? You have the MBA. Loretta slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You cannot just walk away. You have obligations. That wedding for the senator is next week. Brad doesn't know the details. He will figure it out, I said, shrugging. He is a man, after all. Isn't that what you said, Mom? He needs authority. Well, here it is. Here. All of it. I looked at Brad. He was staring at the credit card, his eyes wide with greed. He didn't see the disaster coming. He only saw the spending limit. You are making a mistake, Zara, he said, trying to sound tough, but failing. If you walk out that door, you are not getting back in. We will cut you off. No salary, no access. I laughed then. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dry and humorless. You are cutting me off from the money I earned. You are firing me from the job I created. Do you really think that is a threat? I turned to my mother. She looked furious, her face twisting into a mask of ugliness that she usually kept hidden. You are an ungrateful child, she hissed. After everything we did for you. We gave you the start. We signed those papers. And I paid you back 10 times over, I said. I paid off this house. I bought your cars. I paid for Chantel's wedding. I have carried this family on my back for a decade. But today my back broke. I walked toward the door. My father called my name, his voice cracking, but I didn't stop. I opened the front door and let the humid Atlanta air hit my face. One last thing I said, turning back to look at them frozen in their tableau of greed and delusion. You just handed 2 toddlers the keys to a fighter jet. Don't call me when it crashes into the side of a mountain, because I won't answer. I walked out and closed the door softly behind me. I didn't slam it. Slamming it would show I cared. Silence was more terrifying. I walked to my personal car, a modest sedan I had bought with my own cash, and got in. I took my phone out of my pocket. I opened my contacts list and scrolled to Mom, Dad, Chantel, and Brad. One by one, I hit block. Then I drove away. I didn't go home. I drove straight to a wine bar downtown, ordered a glass of the most expensive red they had, and sat in the window watching the city lights. I felt light. I felt terrified. But mostly, I felt the cold hum of anticipation, because I knew something they didn't. I knew exactly what was waiting for Brad at the office on Monday morning. I knew that the vendor contracts were all up for renewal. I knew that the password to the client database was a 2-factor authentication linked to my personal cell phone. And I knew that without me, Onyx Events was just a fancy name on a piece of paper. They wanted the crown, but they didn't know it was heavy. And I was going to enjoy watching their necks snap under the weight. The real show wasn't the dinner I just left. The real show was starting tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. And I had a front row seat. Monday morning arrived with a humidity that stuck to your skin like a bad reputation, but I was sitting comfortably on the balcony of my high-rise apartment, sipping imported oolong tea. I did not go into the office. I did not check my email. I simply sat there and watched the Atlanta skyline, knowing exactly what was unfolding 5 miles away at the headquarters of Onyx Events. I knew my family better than they knew themselves, and I knew that Brad and Chantel would not arrive at 9. They would arrive at 10:30, expecting the world to be waiting for them. When they finally strutted into the office, Brad was wearing a suit that cost more than his car, and Chantel was dragging a designer bag that I knew for a fact was a knockoff. They walked past the rows of terrified junior event coordinators and straight to the glass-walled corner office that had been mine for 12 years. Sitting at the desk outside that office was Mrs. Rose. She was a 62-year-old church mother with a spine of steel and a Rolodex that was worth more than the building itself. She had been with me since the days I was working out of a basement. She knew where the bodies were buried, and she knew how to get fresh orchids from Thailand in 12 hours flat. Mrs. Rose stood up, adjusting her glasses, and asked Brad if he had an appointment. It was a power move, and I wish I had been there to see it. Brad laughed a loud barking sound that lacked any real humor. He told her to pack her things. He said they were cleaning house and getting rid of the dead weight. He fired the most valuable asset in the company before he even sat down in the chair. Mrs. Rose did not argue and she did not cry. She simply picked up her purse, placed her building access card on the desk, and walked out the front door. She texted me 3 words immediately after. It has begun. With the gatekeeper gone, Brad and Chantel marched into my office ready to seize their kingdom. Brad sat in my ergonomic leather chair, spinning it around like a child with a new toy, while Chantel started opening drawers looking for petty cash or maybe chocolate. Then Brad turned to my computer. It was a custom-built machine, the nerve center of the entire operation. It held 12 years of vendor contracts, client preferences, blackmail material on difficult brides, and the master schedule for the next 18 months. Brad reached for the keyboard, confident that he could just guess the password. He tried my birthday. Access denied. He tried the company name. Access denied. He tried the word password because he is simple-minded. Access denied. He didn't realize that the system was encrypted with biometric security. It required my fingerprint and a retinal scan to even bring up the login screen. Without me, that computer was just an expensive paperweight. They were locked out of the castle they had just stolen, and they didn't even have the sense to be scared yet. The panic started to set in around 11 o'clock. The office phones had been ringing non-stop, but without Mrs. Rose to filter them. The calls were bouncing to the main line, which was currently being ignored by a staff too terrified to move. Finally, the red emergency line on my desk began to flash. This was a line reserved for our top-tier clients, the ones who paid 6 figures for a single evening and expected me to answer on the first ring. Brad was busy trying to pry open a locked file cabinet with a letter opener, so Chantel picked up the phone. On the other end of the line was Jada Williams, the wife of the star point guard for the Atlanta Hawks. We were planning her charity gala, which was scheduled for this coming Saturday. It was a masquerade ball for 500 guests with a budget that could feed a small country. Jada was known for being exacting but fair as long as you delivered perfection. Today she was calling because she had decided to change the entire menu from a seafood spread to a vegan farm-to-table concept due to a new sponsorship deal her husband had signed that morning. Chantel listened for about 30 seconds before she rolled her eyes. I could imagine her twisting a lock of her weave around her finger, annoyed that she actually had to work. She interrupted Jada mid-sentence. She told her that changing the menu 5 days before the event was ridiculous. She said it was too much hassle and that Jada should just stick to the lobster because it was already paid for. She spoke to one of the most powerful women in Atlanta social circles, as if she were ordering drive-through. I can only imagine the silence on the other end of the line. Jada Williams was not a woman who was told no, and she was certainly not a woman who was told she was being a hassle. Her voice apparently dropped an octave, a sure sign of danger. She demanded to speak to Zara immediately. She said she did not know who this receptionist was, but she wanted the boss. Chantel laughed. That was her fatal mistake. She laughed and told Jada that Zara was gone. She said Zara was old news and that she, Chantel, was the new boss in charge. She said if Jada didn't like the seafood, she could go find a caterer at the strip mall because Onyx Events didn't jump through hoops for indecisive people. Jada Williams did not scream. She did not curse. She simply stated that she was pulling the contract demanding her deposit back and that she would personally ensure that every wife, girlfriend, and mother in the NBA knew that Onyx Events was under new and incompetent management. Then she hung up. The dial tone must have sounded like a gunshot in that silent office. Chantel stared at the phone, blinking rapidly, finally realizing that she might have just set fire to a quarter of our annual revenue in under 2 minutes. Brad stopped trying to break into the file cabinet. He looked at Chantel and asked what had happened. She shrugged, trying to play it cool, saying the client was being a diva. But the phone started ringing again. And again. The word was already spreading. The ecosystem of Atlanta high society is small, and news travels faster than light. They needed access to the system. They needed to see the contracts to know if they could legally keep the deposit. They needed to save the ship, but they were locked in the brig. Brad was sweating now. His cheap suit was damp under the arms. He needed into that computer. He pulled out his personal cell phone and called a friend of his, a guy named Sketch, who fixed laptops out of a van in East Atlanta. He put the phone on speaker and demanded that Sketch walk him through bypassing a biometric firewall. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was hacking the mainframe like he was in a spy movie. I was pouring my second cup of tea when my phone vibrated on the glass table. It was a notification from my security app. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Physical breach protocol initiated. Location CEO office, Terminal 1. I picked up my phone and looked at the screen. I could see the logs. Someone was trying to boot the system in safe mode. Someone was trying to force a password reset. It was clumsy and brute force, like a toddler trying to smash a square peg into a round hole. I had a choice in that moment. I could have called them. I could have warned them that the system was rigged to self-destruct if tampered with. I could have saved the data, the client list, the vendor contacts, the 12 years of my life stored on that hard drive. But then I remembered my father's voice telling me to work under my sister. I remembered my mother handing my legacy to a man who couldn't even balance his own checkbook. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt like a surgeon cutting out a tumor. I tapped the notification on my screen. A menu popped up with big red letters. Remote wipe. It asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to permanently erase all data on all connected devices? This action cannot be undone. I didn't hesitate. I pressed confirm. 5 miles away, in the corner office, the large dual monitors on my desk flickered. Brad was in the middle of typing a command prompt when the screens turned a bright angry red. A progress bar appeared, loading rapidly from 0 to 100%. Brad started screaming at the computer, hitting the escape key, mashing the power button, trying to stop the inevitable. Chantel was yelling, asking what he had done. But it was too late. The system wasn't just deleting files, it was overwriting the sectors. It was scrubbing the drives clean. The progress bar hit 100%. The screens went black. Then a single line of green text appeared in the center of the darkness. System purged. Have a nice day. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The hum of the hard drives stopped. The cooling fans spun down. Every contract, every invoice, every contact number, every single piece of digital infrastructure that made Onyx Events a functioning business was gone. It was just plastic and glass now. Brad slumped back in my chair, staring at the black reflection of his own terrified face. He tried to reboot the computer, but it simply beeped once and displayed a no operating system found error. He picked up the office phone to call for help, but the VoIP system ran through the main server, which I had also just wiped. The line was dead. They were sitting in $1 million office with no data, no assistant, no phones, and a furious client base mobilizing against them. And the best part was that they couldn't even blame me. The logs would show that the wipe was triggered by a security protocol in response to an unauthorized hacking attempt. They had destroyed the company because they tried to break into a house they didn't own. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. Monday was turning out to be a beautiful day after all. My penthouse apartment was a sanctuary of silence and cool air conditioning, a stark contrast to the humid panic I knew was consuming the city below. I was sitting on my velvet sofa swirling a glass of deep red Cabernet when the pounding started. It was 11:30 at night. The concierge had called up 2 minutes prior, his voice apologetic, saying my mother was in the lobby and demanding to see me. I had told him to let her up. I knew this visit was inevitable. The lioness does not stay in her den when her cubs are starving, even if the cubs are grown adults who set their own house on fire. When I opened the heavy oak door, Loretta did not greet me. She did not ask how I was. She stormed past me into the foyer, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble floor. She looked disheveled, which for a woman who usually slept in silk bonnets to preserve her blowout was a sign of a complete mental breakdown. Her church suit from Sunday was gone, replaced by a tracksuit that she usually only wore to the hair salon, but she was still clutching her pearls like a lifeline. "Fix it," she demanded, spinning around to face me. Her eyes were wild. "Fix it right now, Zara. You put the code back. You turn the computers back on. You give Brad the passwords." I closed the door gently and leaned against it, taking a slow sip of my wine. The rich liquid coated my tongue, grounding me. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to that professional register I used for unreasonable brides. "The system has a security protocol. Once it is triggered by an unauthorized breach, it scrubs everything. It is a safety feature to protect client data." Brad tried to hack it. He triggered the wipe. "You are a liar," she spat, stepping closer. "You did this on purpose. You sat up here in your ivory tower and you pressed a button to ruin your sister. You are jealous, Zara. You have always been jealous. You see Chantel with her husband and her beautiful babies, and you cannot stand it. You want to see her fail because you are miserable and alone." The words should have hurt. A few years ago, they would have sent me crying to my room, wondering why I was not enough. But tonight, they just felt tired. They felt like a script from a bad soap opera that I had already watched 1,000 times. "I am not jealous, Mom," I said, walking past her into the living room. "I am protecting myself. I built that company. I built the database. I built the reputation. You gave it away. You cannot give away what is inside my head, and you certainly cannot force me to hand over the keys to the digital kingdom just because Brad is too incompetent to ask for help before he tries to break in." Loretta followed me, her voice rising to a preach. "Honor thy father and thy mother, Zara. That is the commandment. You are dishonoring us. You are bringing shame on this family. The Bible says that pride goes before destruction. Your pride is going to destroy everything we have worked for. You are being selfish. You are thinking only of yourself while your sister is at home crying because she does not know how she is going to feed her children next month if this business goes under." She was really going for it, using the Lord and the babies in the same breath. It was her signature move. I sat down in my armchair and crossed my legs. "I am not the one who destroyed the business, Mom. I left it intact. I left it with a full schedule of bookings and a healthy bank account. All they had to do was run it. But they could not even get through the first morning without trying to cheat the system." "You locked them out," she screamed. "You set them up to fail." "I set up a security system for a multi-million-dollar company," I corrected. "Any competent CEO would have known not to brute force a biometric lock." "But we are not here to talk about IT security, are we? You are here because you are scared." "I am not scared," she huffed, smoothing down the front of her tracksuit. "I am angry. I am angry that I raised a daughter who would turn her back on her own flesh and blood." I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the anger and the bluster, I could see the tremor in her hands. She knew. Deep down, she knew she had made a mistake. But Loretta was a woman who would rather drown than admit she could not swim. I reached for my phone, which was sitting on the side table. I unlocked it and opened the banking app. Even though I had handed over the company credit card, my name was still on the primary operating account as a signatory. I had kept view only access specifically for this moment. "You keep talking about taking care of the family, Mom," I said, my voice soft. "You keep saying that Brad needs this company to provide for Chantel and the twins. That he is a good man who just needs a chance." "He is a good man," she insisted. "He loves your sister. He is stepping up." I turned the phone screen toward her. It showed the transaction history for the Onyx Events operating account. At the very top, dated today at 3:45 p.m., was a withdrawal. "Read that," I said. Loretta squinted. She refused to wear her reading glasses in public because she thought they made her look old. "It says $50,000, she said, dismissing it. "So what? Running a business costs money, Zara. You know that. Read the merchant name, Mom." She leaned in closer. Her lips moved silently as she sounded it out. "Atlanta Luxury Automotive." She pulled back as if the phone had burned her. That is the deposit on a Porsche 911, I explained, taking the phone back. Brad withdrew $50,000 from the company operating fund this afternoon. Not to pay vendors, not to fix the computer system he destroyed, not to refund the deposit to Jada Williams. He took $50,000 of company money to put a down payment on a sports car. The silence in the room was heavy. I took another sip of wine watching her process this. I could see the gears turning. I could see her trying to find a way to justify it, to make it make sense in her world, where Brad was the hero and I was the villain. He is the CEO, she said, finally her voice wavering just a fraction before strengthening again. He has to look the part, Zara. You drive a Porsche. Why shouldn't he? He has to meet with high-end clients. He cannot pull up in that old sedan. It is an investment in the company image. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a dark, bitter sound. An investment, I repeated. Mom, the company has no data. It has no contracts. It just lost its biggest client. And his priority was buying a car. Do you really believe that is looking out for the family? He is under a lot of stress. She snapped, her eyes flashing. He is coping the best way he knows how. You are just trying to nitpick because you want to prove you are better than him. I am better than him at this, I said flatly. That is not arrogance. That is a fact proven by 12 years of profit versus 12 hours of destruction. But that is not the point. The point is you came here to call me selfish. You came here to tell me I am hurting the family. But look at that transaction, Mom. Really look at it. That is your retirement money he is spending. That is the twins' college fund. And he blew it in an afternoon. Loretta stiffened. She drew herself up to her full height, channeling every ounce of the matriarch she pretended to be. I did not come here to discuss Brad's financial decisions with you. I came here to tell you what is going to happen. Oh, I asked, raising an eyebrow. And what is that? You are going to come into the office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, she said, her voice icy. You are going to apologize to Brad and Chantel for your little tantrum. You are going to restore the data. And you are going to train Brad properly without this attitude. And if you don't, she took a deep breath, playing her final card. If you don't, I will go to Pastor Jenkins. I will go to the Mother's Board. I will tell everyone at church that you have abandoned your family. I will tell them you are an unfilial daughter who stole from her own sister out of spite. You know how people talk, Zara. By the time I am done, you won't be able to show your face in Atlanta society. It was a powerful threat. In our world, the church was the social center. Reputation was currency. My mother was threatening to bankrupt me socially to paint me as a pariah in the community I had grown up in. She knew that my business relied on networking, on knowing the right people. She was threatening to burn my name to the ground. I looked at her standing there in my living room, willing to destroy her own daughter to save face. It was tragic, really. You do what you have to do, Mom, I said, standing up and walking to the door. I opened it wide. But before you go, you might want to call Brad. Why? She asked, narrowing her eyes. Because I checked the account balance before you got here, I said, leaning against the doorframe. The operating account had a $75,000 overdraft protection limit. After that car deposit and the severance pay, he probably had to give Mrs. Rose. There is about $500 left. Loretta stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The next time he swipes that card, I continued, smiling pleasantly, it is going to decline. And if he tries to write a check for the venue rental for the senator's daughter, it is going to bounce. So you can go tell the church whatever you want. But you better hurry, because by tomorrow afternoon the only thing people are going to be talking about is how the new CEO of Onyx Events wrote a bad check. Get out of my house, Mom. She stood there for a moment, her face a mask of shock and fury. Then she marched past me, muttering under her breath about how I would regret this. She did not look back. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I turned off the lights in the foyer and walked back to the living room. I finished my wine in the dark, looking out at the city. I felt a strange sense of calm. The bridge was burned, the lines were drawn, and tomorrow the real crash would begin. I just hoped Brad enjoyed his new car, because it was going to be the most expensive mistake of his life. Saturday arrived wrapped in a suffocating blanket of heat that hung over Atlanta like a wet wool coat. It was one of those July days where the air shimmered off the asphalt, and the humidity was so high you could practically drink the atmosphere. I was not at the office, and I certainly was not at the venue, but I knew exactly what the schedule for the day was supposed to be. I had spent 6 months planning Senator Vance's daughter's wedding. It was the crown jewel of our summer calendar. The budget was unlimited, the guest list was a who is who of Georgia politics, and the expectations were stratospheric. I had designed a concept based on A Midsummer Night's Dream, with imported white peonies cascading from the ceiling, and a menu that featured fresh Maine lobster flown in that morning. But I was not running the show anymore. Brad was. And Brad, as I had discovered from my view, only access to the bank accounts, had decided that my vendor list was too expensive. He had looked at the budget I allocated for florals and catering, and he saw profit margins he could skim. He didn't understand relationships or quality. He only understood that he had a $50,000 hole in the company accounts from his car purchase, and he needed to fill it before anyone noticed. So instead of using my contact in Holland for the peonies, he had gone to a local wholesale warehouse that mostly supplied funeral homes and gas stations. Instead of using the five-star chef I had retained, he had hired a catering company from the suburbs that specialized in high school football banquets and budget corporate lunches. I sat in my living room with the air conditioning set to a crisp 68 degrees, reviewing the original run of Show Document on my tablet. At this exact moment, noon, they should have been loading in the ice sculptures. I knew for a fact Brad had canceled the ice sculptures because he thought they were a waste of money. He had replaced them with a chocolate fountain because he thought it was classy. A chocolate fountain in 98-degree heat in a historic venue with vintage carpets. It was a disaster waiting to happen, and he was walking right into it with his chest puffed out, wearing his new watch and driving his new car, thinking he was the king of Atlanta. He had no idea that the venue, the Piedmont Driving Club, had a notoriously temperamental HVAC system. I always rented industrial backup generators and portable AC units for summer weddings there. It cost $10,000, but it ensured the bride never broke a sweat. Brad saw that line item and deleted it. He probably thought he was being a savvy businessman, cutting unnecessary fat. He didn't realize he was cutting the oxygen line. As the clock ticked toward 5, the ceremony start time, I could almost feel the disaster vibrating through the city floor. I imagined the guests arriving in their tuxedos and heavy gowns, stepping out of their limousines into the oppressive heat, expecting a blast of cool air when they entered the ballroom and finding only a stagnant warmth. I imagined Brad smiling that oily smile of his, telling them it would cool down soon while sweat trickled down his back. He had gambled the reputation of a 12-year-old company on his ability to cut corners, and he was about to learn that in the luxury market there are no shortcuts, only dead ends. The catastrophe began before the bride even walked down the aisle. The flowers were the first casualty. Peonies are delicate creatures. They need cool air and water. The cheap substitutions Brad had purchased were already wilting in the heat of the delivery van. By the time they were arranged on the tables, they looked brown and sad, drooping like wet tissue paper. The bride's mother, a woman who could spot a knockoff purse from 50 yards away, reportedly stopped in the doorway of the ballroom and burst into tears. She demanded to know where the lush garden I had promised was. Brad told her that there had been a supply chain issue. He lied to the face of a woman whose husband sat on the appropriations committee. Then came the smell. The seafood medley Brad had ordered to replace the fresh lobster had been sitting in the catering staging area, which due to the lack of auxiliary cooling was rapidly heating up. The scent of turning shellfish began to waft through the room, mingling with the smell of hundreds of sweating bodies. The AC system in the club was overwhelmed, just as I knew it would be. The temperature inside the ballroom climbed to 80 degrees, then 85. Guests were fanning themselves with the heavy cardstock programs. Makeup was melting off faces. Hairdos were collapsing in the humidity. The chocolate fountain Brad was so proud of had seized up because the chocolate was the wrong consistency, turning into a clumpy brown sludge that looked anything but appetizing. But the breaking point was the dinner service. When the plates were brought out, the steak was gray and tough, and the shrimp had a rubbery texture that bounced when you poked it. A prominent judge at table 4 took one bite and loudly spit it into his napkin. That was the signal the room needed. The polite murmurs of discontent turned into open hostility. Senator Vance did not handle it quietly. He was a man used to getting exactly what he paid for. He stormed up to the head table where Brad was trying to look busy and grabbed him by the arm. He didn't pull him aside. He didn't whisper. He shouted. He screamed that this was an insult. He screamed that he had paid for a coronation and received a garbage dump. He pointed at the wilting flowers, the sweating guests, and the inedible food, and demanded to know where Zara was. "I want the person I hired." The senator bellowed, his face purple with rage. "I want the professional. Who are you? You are a joke. You are a fraud." Brad crumbled. He had no answers. He tried to blame the staff. He tried to blame the venue. He was sweating so profusely that his shirt was translucent. He looked like a frightened child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. He looked around for Chantel for support, but she was gone. Chantel had fled the moment the first complaint was lodged. She was currently locked in the handicap stall of the ladies' restroom, crying so hard she was hyperventilating. She could hear the women outside at the sinks fixing their makeup and talking. They were ruthless. They were saying that Onyx Events had turned into a scam operation. They were saying that the new management was trashy and incompetent. They were laughing at the chocolate fountain. Chantel realized in the cool porcelain echo of that bathroom that she wasn't a CEO. She wasn't a boss. She was just a girl who had let her mother convince her she deserved a crown she couldn't carry. She texted our mother begging her to make it stop, but Loretta was sitting at home oblivious, waiting for photos of the triumph that would never come. The night ended early. By 9 o'clock, the ballroom was empty, save for the cleaning crew sweeping up the dead flowers. The senator had refused to pay the final installment of the fee. He stood in the lobby of the club giving an impromptu press conference to the social columnists who had been invited to cover the event. He stated clearly and unequivocally that he intended to sue Onyx Events for breach of contract negligence and emotional distress. He vowed to destroy the company's reputation in the state of Georgia. The news hit social media before the valet had even retrieved the last car. My phone, which I had kept face down on the coffee table, began to buzz. It started as a hum and quickly turned into a continuous vibration that rattled the glass. I picked it up and opened Instagram. My feed was a bloodbath. Influencers who had attended the wedding were posting stories of the wilted flowers and the gross food with captions like "RIP Onyx" and "Worst wedding ever." The hashtag #OnyxFail was trending locally. I saw a video clip of the senator shouting at Brad. It had already been viewed 10,000 times. In the background, you could see Brad looking around wildly, his eyes filled with panic. It was the look of a man realizing his life was over. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settling in my gut. It wasn't joy exactly. It was the feeling of a math equation balancing out. Action meets consequence. Arrogance meets reality. As I sat back down, the calls started coming in. Not from my family. They were likely too busy imploding. These calls were from the vendors I had worked with for a decade. The florist in Holland called to ask why I hadn't placed the order for the next month. The linen supplier texted asking if the rumors were true. Then the calls from clients started. Brides whose weddings were next month, charity directors whose galas were in the fall. They were panicking. They had seen the news. They wanted reassurances that Brad couldn't give them because he didn't know their names and he didn't have their contracts. I let every single call go to voicemail. I watched the notifications pile up like snowdrifts. Missed call from Jada Williams. Missed call from the museum board. Missed call from the governor's assistant. Onyx Events was dead. It had died the moment I walked out the door, but the body had just stopped twitching. The brand equity I had built over 12 years had evaporated in 4 hours. My mother's retirement plan, my sister's future, Brad's ego, it was all ash now. But amidst the wreckage, I saw my opportunity. The market hates a vacuum. All those clients, all those high-budget events, they still needed to happen. They just needed a new home. And I knew exactly where they were going to go. I wasn't going to save Onyx, I wasn't going to save my family. I was going to let the fire burn until there was nothing left but the foundation, and then I was going to build something new on top of their failure. I took a sip of tea and smiled. The phone rang again. It was Brad. I declined the call and blocked the number. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Monday morning found me sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, staring out at the Buckhead skyline from the 34th floor. Across from me sat David Sterling. He was not just a lawyer, he was a shark in a three-piece suit. A man who ate corporate mergers for breakfast and sued insurance companies for sport. He was one of the most powerful black men in Atlanta, and he had been watching my career for years, waiting for the moment I would finally wake up and realize my worth. I had brought him the incorporation papers for Onyx Events, the ones my mother had forced me to sign 12 years ago when I was young and hungry and desperate for approval. David flipped through the pages, his gold pen tapping a rhythmic beat against the mahogany desk. He read in silence for 10 minutes while I held my breath, waiting for him to tell me I was trapped. Waiting for him to say that Loretta had won, that she owned my name and my talent forever. Finally, David stopped tapping. He looked up at me, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face. He closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. "Your mother is a very arrogant woman, Zara," he said, his voice smooth like aged bourbon. "She was so convinced that she owned you body and soul that she forgot the most basic rule of business. She forgot to protect her asset against flight." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "There is no non-compete clause," David said, leaning back in his chair. "Not a single word. Usually when a founder steps down or is pushed out, there is a restrictive covenant preventing them from operating in the same market for a year or two. It is standard practice. It is business 101. But Loretta didn't include one." "Do you know why?" I shook my head, though I was starting to suspect the answer. "Because she thinks you are property," David said, his eyes hard. "She thinks you are a child who needs her permission to breathe, let alone start a rival company. She assumed you would never dare to cross her. She banked on your guilt keeping you in line." I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, loose and wild. My mother's narcissism was my get-out-of-jail-free card. She had been so busy controlling me emotionally that she had failed to control me legally. "So I can start over?" I asked. "Right now. Today. You can walk out of this office and start selling ice to polar bears if you want to," David confirmed. "And here's the kicker. You own your intellectual property. The vendor relationships are personal. The client lists are in your head. You are not stealing anything, Zara. You are simply taking your talents elsewhere." I stood up and extended my hand. David shook it firmly. "Let's incorporate," I said. "But not Onyx. That name is tarnished." "What do you want to call it?" David asked, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. "Z Lux," I said without hesitation. "Just me. No family, no baggage, just excellence." David wrote it down in bold strokes. Z Lux. "It sounds expensive. I like it. Now go make some money, Zara, and bury them." I walked out of his office feeling 10 feet tall. The humidity outside didn't bother me. The traffic didn't bother me. I had a weapon now. I had a name. And I had a list of 50 people who had the power to make or break the social season in this city. I went home and opened my personal laptop. I didn't need a fancy office yet. I didn't need a staff. I just needed my reputation. I spent the next hour drafting a single email. I didn't hire a graphic designer. I didn't use a marketing template. I wrote it as a personal note from me to the people who mattered. The list included Jada Williams, the senator, the museum board chair, and 47 other high-net-worth individuals who had trusted me with their most important moments for a decade. The subject line was simple: a new chapter. The body of the email was brief. It read, "Dear valued client, you may have heard rumors regarding changes at Onyx Events. I am writing to confirm that I am no longer associated with that agency. However, my passion for creating unforgettable experiences has not changed. I am thrilled to announce the launch of Z-Lux, a boutique planning firm dedicated to the highest standard of excellence. The quality you expect has moved to a new address. If you have an upcoming event and find yourself in need of immediate assistance, my personal line is open. Sincerely, Zara." I hit send. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The first reply came in 3 minutes. It was from Jada Williams. It said simply, "Thank God. Send me the contract." Then the senator's office replied asking if I could salvage his wife's birthday party next month. Then the museum board. One by one, the dominoes fell. They didn't care about the office space. They didn't care about the logo. They cared that when they called, I answered. They cared that I knew their allergies and their flower preferences and their fears. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had secured $500,000 in deposits. The money hit my new business account with a satisfying ping on my phone notification. But the real victory wasn't the clients. It was the vendors. Word had spread through the Atlanta service industry that I was back in the game. My phone started blowing up with texts from florists, chefs, lighting technicians, and venue managers. They had all heard about the disaster at the senator's wedding. They had all dealt with Brad's arrogance and Chantel's incompetence. They were desperate for a captain who knew how to steer the ship. The owner of the top floral import company in the Southeast called me personally. "Zara," he said, his voice frantic, "please tell me you are taking over the governor's ball. Brad called me this morning trying to order carnations." "Carnations, Zara. For the governor. I cannot work with these people. They are going to ruin my brand." I laughed. "I am taking over everything, Michael. Send all future invoices to Z-Lux. And block Brad's number." "Done," he said. "You are a lifesaver." By 5 o'clock, I had effectively migrated 80% of Onyx Events' revenue stream to a company that was less than 8 hours old. I hadn't stolen a single file. I hadn't breached a single contract. I had simply opened a door and let the water flow downhill. The market had spoken, and the market said that without me, Onyx was worthless. I was pouring myself a glass of celebratory champagne when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed a picture of Chantel taken years ago when we were actually friends smiling at a beach picnic. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to answer. I knew what was coming. The denial, the rage, the victimhood. It was the soundtrack of her life. I swiped green and put it on speaker, setting the phone on the marble island. "Hello, Chantel." "You thief!" she screamed. The sound was distorted by the poor connection, likely because she was calling from the office landline, since I knew their cell service was about to be cut off for non-payment. "You stole our clients. You stole our money. How could you do this to us?" I took a sip of champagne, the bubbles crisp on my tongue. "I didn't steal anything, Chantel. I sent an email announcing my new business. The clients chose to hire me. That is called the free market." "You did it on purpose," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Jada Williams called and demanded her deposit back. She said she is suing us for the wedding disaster. The museum board canceled their gala. We have nothing, Zara. We have no revenue coming in for the next 3 months. How am I supposed to feed my children? How am I supposed to pay the mortgage on the new house we just put an offer on?" "You put an offer on a house?" I asked, my eyebrows shooting up. "With what money?" "With the projected earnings from the 3rd quarter," she sobbed. "Brad said we were going to make a killing. But now you have taken it all. You are taking food out of the mouths of your own niece and nephew. You are a monster. You are evil. Mom was right about you. You are jealous and bitter and you want us to suffer. I set the glass down. The guilt tactic. It was their favorite weapon. They used those children like human shields, hiding their incompetence behind the innocence of babies. Listen to me closely, Chantel, I said, my voice dropping to that deadly calm register that terrified my staff. I am not taking food from your kids. You and your husband are starving them because you are too lazy to learn how to farm. You thought you could just walk into my field and harvest crops you didn't plant. You thought it was easy. You thought I just sat around and pointed at things. I worked 18-hour days for 12 years to build those relationships. I continued, my voice rising just slightly. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I missed having a life so that I could be the best. And you thought you could replace me with a man who buys a Porsche before he pays the light bill. I am going to tell Mom, she threatened, her voice wavering. I am going to tell everyone what you did. Tell them I said. Tell the whole world. Tell them that the moment you got the wheel, you drove the bus into a ditch. Tell them that the clients left because you treated them like dirt. Tell them that you are failing because you are a failure, Chantel, not because of me. She was sobbing now, ugly wet sounds that echoed in the empty office she was squatting in. Please, Zara, just give us a few clients back. Just the small ones. We need cash flow. Brad is panicking. He owes people money. Bad people. That sounds like a personal problem, I said. Maybe he should sell the Porsche. Oh, wait, he can't because he doesn't have the title yet, does he? He just paid the deposit. That is $50,000 gone, Chantel. Maybe you should ask him where the rest of the operating capital went before you call me a thief. She went silent. I could hear her breathing, ragged and terrified. She knew. She knew Brad was a sinking ship, but she had tied herself to the mast because she was too proud to swim. Clients are not property, I said, delivering the final blow. They have feet. They have brains. They walked away from you because you are incompetent. They are running toward me because I deliver. I didn't steal them, Chantel. They are fleeing a burning building. And you are the one holding the matches. I hung up the phone and blocked the office number. I stared at the blank screen, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. It was done. The cord was cut. They were in free fall now, and there was no safety net left to catch them. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The lights of Atlanta were waking up, blinking on in the twilight. Somewhere out there, in the mansions of Buckhead and the penthouses of Midtown, my clients were toasting to Z-Lux. They were relieved. They were happy. And I was finally getting paid what I was worth. My mother thought she could break me by taking away my title. She didn't realize that the title didn't make the queen. The power was in the blood, the sweat, and the years of grinding when no one was watching. She had bet on the wrong horse, and now she was going to lose the farm. I finished my champagne and poured another glass. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. I had a company to build and a legacy to reclaim. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. The empire of Onyx was crumbling and Z-Lux was rising from the dust. And it was going to be magnificent. The calendar turned to August, and the heat in Atlanta became oppressive, a heavy blanket that smothered everything it touched. For Onyx Events, the temperature was rising in a different way. In the 30 days since I had walked out, the company had hemorrhaged 80% of its recurring revenue. The corporate contracts were the first to go. Businesses do not run on sentimentality, they run on reliability, and Brad had proven himself to be as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. The cancellation emails were not even polite anymore. They were legal notices citing breach of performance and demanding refunds that the company simply did not have. Brad was drowning, but not just in business failures. He was drowning in debt that had nothing to do with flowers or catering. I found out later through the grapevine of the Atlanta underworld, which intersects surprisingly often with high finance, that Brad had been trying to cover the initial operating losses by gambling. He had taken out high-interest loans from men who did not send emails when you missed a payment. Men who sent guys with baseball bats. He had leveraged himself to the hilt, betting on obscure cryptocurrencies, hoping for a moonshot that would refill the company coffers before anyone noticed the emptiness. Instead, he had dug a hole so deep he could see the devil looking back at him. He was desperate. And desperation makes people creative in the worst possible ways. He couldn't tell my parents the truth. He couldn't admit that Onyx was a shell and that he was being hunted by loan sharks. So he invented a lie. He concocted a fantasy about a massive international expansion. He told them that he was in talks with a consortium in Dubai to bring Onyx Events to the Middle East. He created fake slide decks and forged letters of intent. He told them that to secure this multi-million-dollar partnership, he needed liquidity. He needed a bridge loan to show proof of funds. He sold them a dream because he knew they were too proud to wake up to the nightmare. The meeting happened on a Tuesday night at my parents' house, the same house I had paid off for them 5 years ago. I wasn't there, of course, but I know every detail because my father Otis confessed it to me later when he was broken and weeping. Brad sat at the dining room table sweating through his shirt while Chantel sat next to him nodding along like a bobblehead doll. She knew they were in trouble, but she didn't know about the loan sharks. She just knew the credit cards were declining, and she needed the money to keep flowing. Brad laid out the papers. He wasn't asking for a small loan, he was asking for $500,000. He wanted them to take out a home equity line of credit on the house. The house was their only real asset, the symbol of their rise from poverty to the middle class. It was fully paid off thanks to me, and it was worth a fortune in the current market. Otis hesitated. For the first time in years, his survival instinct kicked in. He looked at the papers, and then he looked at Brad. He asked why a successful company needed a personal loan from its founder's parents. He asked why the bank wouldn't finance this expansion if the Dubai deal was so solid. He asked the right questions. He said that the house was their safety net, their retirement. He said he didn't feel comfortable risking the roof over their heads for a business deal he didn't fully understand. But Brad knew exactly which buttons to push. He didn't look at Otis. He looked at Loretta. He turned his charm on my mother, feeding her the one thing she craved more than security status. He told her that this deal would make them billionaires, not just millionaires. He told her that the Henderson family name would be on skyscrapers in Dubai. He painted a picture of her flying first class to international galas, of her being the matriarch of a global empire. Loretta ate it up. She looked at Otis with disdain. She told him he was being small-minded. She said he lacked vision just like he always had. She brought up his past failures, his inability to provide the luxury she felt she deserved. She emasculated him right there at the table, telling him that Brad was the son she never had, the man who was finally going to give this family the glory it was owed. She said that if Otis didn't sign, he was holding back the future of his grandchildren. Brad pressed the advantage. He told them it was just for 30 days. He said the moment the Dubai funds cleared, he would pay off the loan and give them a $50,000 bonus for their trouble. It was a lie so bold it was almost impressive. Otis looked at his wife, his eyes pleading for her to be rational. But Loretta was already reaching for the pen. She was blinded by the glare of the imaginary gold Brad was dangling. She signed her name with a flourish. Then she pushed the paper toward Otis, her eyes hard and cold, daring him to defy her. Broken down by 40 years of her ambition and his own passivity, Otis took the pen. His hand shook as he signed the deed to his home over to a bank that would show no mercy. He signed away his sanctuary because he couldn't say no to his wife's vanity. The loan was processed with terrifying speed. Because the house was unencumbered and their credit was good thanks to years of my financial support, the bank fast-tracked the application. Within 48 hours, $500,000 was deposited into the joint account that Brad had access to. He didn't pay the vendors. He didn't refund Jada Williams. He didn't pay the electric bill for the office, which was currently 2 months overdue. He took every single cent of that money and transferred it to an offshore cryptocurrency exchange that promised anonymity and high leverage. Brad was not a trader. He was a gambler who thought he was smarter than the market. He was trying to hit a home run to clear his debts to the loan sharks and refill the company accounts in one fell swoop. He put the entire $500,000 into a speculative coin that was being hyped on social media forums, a classic pump and dump scheme that he was too arrogant to recognize. He sat in the dark office staring at his phone, watching the charts. For the first 6 hours, the line went up. He was up 50,000, then 100,000. He could have pulled out. He could have saved the house. He could have paid his debts. But greed is a monster that is never full. He thought it would go higher. He thought he was a genius. He started calculating which yacht he would buy. Then the floor fell out. The whales who actually controlled the market sold off their positions, triggering a cascade of panic selling. The red candles on the chart grew longer and longer, plunging straight down. Brad tried to sell, but the exchange froze under the traffic. He watched helplessly as the value of his portfolio dropped. 400,000, 200,000, 50,000. In 24 hours, the account balance went from $500,000 to less than 4,000. The coin had crashed to zero. It was a rug pull, a scam, and he had fallen for it with everything he had. He sat there in the silence of the empty office, the glow of the screen illuminating his pale, sweating face. He had lost his wife's inheritance. He had lost my parents' home. And the loan sharks were still calling. The reality of what he had done crashed down on him. There was no Dubai deal. There was no way to pay back the bank. The first mortgage payment would be due in 30 days, and he didn't even have enough money to buy lunch. My parents were sleeping in their bed, dreaming of international travel and respect. They didn't know that the roof above them didn't belong to them anymore. They didn't know that their golden boy had just gambled away their entire life's work on a digital magic bean. The house was gone. It was just a matter of time before the eviction notice arrived. And I, sitting in my office across town, watching the bankruptcy filings for similar shell companies, knew that the storm wasn't just coming. It had already made landfall. Desperation has a specific smell, a mix of stale sweat and cheap cologne, and by Wednesday afternoon, Brad reeked of it. The sharks he had borrowed from were not the kind who sent polite email reminders about late payments. They were the kind who sent pictures of your house taken from the bushes across the street. Brad had received one such picture that morning, along with a text message that simply said, 48 hours. He was terrified. He was shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup without spilling it all over his knockoff designer jeans. He had gambled the house and lost. He had drained the operating accounts and lost. Now he was looking at a physical threat to his safety, and he had nowhere left to turn except toward a crime that would seal his fate forever. He knew about the rainy day fund because Chantel had mentioned it once in passing years ago when she was complaining about how much money I hoarded. It was a joint trust account I had set up with my mother back when I first started Onyx Events. It was supposed to be a catastrophic safety net, a fund that required 2 signatures to access specifically to prevent impulse spending. There was exactly $200,000 in it, money I had forgotten about in the chaos of building my new empire. But Brad hadn't forgotten. To him, that account wasn't a safety net, it was a lifeline. It was the only thing standing between him and a hospital visit courtesy of his bookie. He spent the morning in the back office practicing my signature. He found old contracts I had signed and traced the loops of my Z and the sharp strike of my A over and over again until his hand cramped. He was sweating through his shirt, his eyes darting around the empty room as if he expected the police to burst in at any moment. But the police weren't watching him yet. Only I was, though he didn't know it. When he felt he had the forgery down, he drove to the bank branch in Buckhead, the one where the tellers didn't know us personally because we usually did our banking online. He walked in with a withdrawal slip for the full amount, $200,000, in a cashier's check made out to himself. He approached the teller, a young woman who looked bored and tired. He flashed his charming smile, the one that had fooled my mother, but it was brittle now, cracking around the edges. He told her that his business partner Zara was out of town and needed these funds immediately for an emergency vendor payment. He slid the slip across the counter, along with the forged authorization letter he had spent hours drafting. The teller looked at the slip. She looked at the letter. And then she looked at the screen. She frowned. The signature on the screen didn't match the shaky scrawl on the paper perfectly. It was close, but the biometric analysis software flagged it immediately. She told him to wait a moment. She said she needed a manager override for a transaction of this size. Brad stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He watched her pick up the phone. He watched her whisper something while looking at him. He almost ran. He almost turned around and bolted for the door, leaving the paper trail behind him. But the fear of the loan sharks was stronger than the fear of the bank manager. He stayed rooted to the spot, wiping his clammy palms on his pants, waiting for the verdict. 5 miles away in the sleek glass conference room of Z Lux, my phone vibrated. It wasn't a text, it was a Priority 1 security alert from the bank. I picked it up and saw the notification. Signature verification failed. Withdrawal attempt. Account ending in 4598. Amount $200,000. Location Buckhead Branch. I stared at the screen. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew who was standing at that counter. A cold fury washed over me, not because of the money, but because of the audacity. That money was the first profit I ever made. It was the seed corn I had saved when I was eating ramen noodles and working out of a basement, and he was trying to steal it to pay for his mistakes. I was about to press the deny button. I was about to shut it down to freeze the account and have security escort him out. But my finger hovered over the screen. I paused. I realized that if I stopped him now, it was just an attempted transaction. It was a misunderstanding. He could claim he had verbal permission. He could claim it was a mistake. My mother would cover for him. She would say she authorized it. It would be a messy family dispute that would end with me looking like the villain for starving them. I needed advice. I needed a shark. I hit the speed dial for David Sterling. He answered on the first ring, his voice calm and composed amidst the background noise of what sounded like a court recess. "David," I said, keeping my voice low, "Brad is at the bank. He is trying to drain the old joint trust using a forged signature. The system flagged it. I have a deny or approve prompt on my phone right now." David didn't gasp. He didn't ask if I was sure. He went straight to the chessboard. "How much is he trying to take?" 200,000. All of it. David hummed a low, dangerous sound. "Listen to me very carefully, Zara. Do not deny it." What I asked, shocked. "David, that is my money. If you deny it..." David explained, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "He walks away. He claims he was just trying to move funds for business operations. He says he signed it because you were unavailable. It is a civil matter. It is a family squabble. The police won't touch it. But if I let him take it..." "If you let him take it," David said, cutting me off the moment that money leaves the bank and enters his possession, the crime changes. It goes from attempted fraud to grand larceny. It becomes wire fraud if he moves it electronically. It becomes a felony with a mandatory prison sentence. We are talking 10 years, Zara, not a slap on the wrist, 10 years in a federal facility. I sat there in my office looking at the blinking prompt on my phone. 10 years. That was the price of my freedom. That was the cost of ensuring he could never hurt my business or my reputation again. "You are telling me to let him steal $200,000 from me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I am telling you to invest $200,000 in his incarceration," David corrected. "You will get the money back eventually through restitution, or we will seize his assets. But right now, you need him to cross the line. You need him to commit the act. Let him hang himself, Zara. Give him the rope." I looked at the timer on the security alert. I had 30 seconds left to respond before it automatically declined. I thought about the way he had laughed at me at the dinner table. I thought about the way he had fired Mrs. Rose. I thought about the text messages where he called me a bitter spinster. "Do it," David said softly. "End this." I took a deep breath. I thought about the poverty I had clawed my way out of. I thought about the empire I was building. And I realized that David was right. I couldn't keep fighting skirmishes with these people. I needed a nuclear option. I tapped the screen. I pressed approve. Then I called the bank manager immediately. I knew him from years of business banking. His name was Mr. Henderson. He answered, sounding relieved. Ms. Zara, we just got the approval override from your device. I wanted to verbally confirm. The gentleman here seems very anxious. Yes, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. I am authorizing the transaction. Let him have the check. But I need you to do something for me. Anything, Ms. Zara. I need you to flag this transaction for internal audit immediately after he leaves, I said. I need you to preserve the high-definition security footage of him at the counter. I need you to save the physical withdrawal slip with the forged signature. And I need you to log the IP address of the device he uses if he transfers any of it online. I want a full evidentiary package ready for law enforcement by the end of the day. Mr. Henderson paused. There was a moment of heavy silence on the line as he understood what I was asking. He was a smart man. He knew I wasn't authorizing a payment. I was authorizing an entrapment. I understand, Ms. Zara, he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. We will secure all records. The cameras are recording in 4K. We will have a clear shot of his face and the document. Thank you, I said. Let him go. Let him think he got away with it. I hung up the phone and walked to the window of my office. I looked down at the streets of Buckhead. Somewhere down there in a bank branch with bad lighting, Brad was watching the teller return to the window. He was watching her smile, a professional fake smile. He was watching her count out the cashier's check or process the transfer. I could imagine the relief flooding his body. He thought he had won. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he was walking out of there with a solution to all his problems. He didn't know he was walking out with a pair of handcuffs, they just weren't locked on his wrists yet. He would take that money and he would run straight to the loan sharks. He would pay them off and feel like a big man again. He would probably buy a bottle of champagne to celebrate. He would go home to Chantel and tell her he had fixed everything, that he was a genius, that I was a fool who didn't even notice money missing from her accounts. He had no idea that I had just bought his future for $200,000. It was a lot of money, but as I watched the traffic flow like blood through the arteries of the city, I decided it was a bargain. I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop. I had a gala to plan, I had a business to run, and I had a court case to prepare for. The trap was set, the bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the right moment to pull the string. And I knew exactly when that moment would be. The Black Legacy Gala was 3 months away. It was the biggest night of the year. It was where everyone who was anyone would be watching. That was where I would drop the hammer. Brad thought he was walking into a bright future, but he was walking into his own funeral. And I was going to be the one delivering the eulogy. The leaves in Atlanta had finally started to turn, bringing a crispness to the air that usually signaled relief from the oppressive summer heat. But for me, it signaled the beginning of the end. It was October, and tonight was the Black Legacy Gala. In the ecosystem of Atlanta's Black elite, this wasn't just a party, it was the Super Bowl, the Oscars, and a family reunion rolled into one. It was where deals were struck over glasses of champagne and where reputations were either gilded in gold or dragged through the mud. For the past 3 months, I had watched from the shadows as my family performed a grotesque pantomime of success. Onyx Events was dead, a hollow shell rotting from the inside out, but they were painting over the cracks with layers of denial and debt. Brad had used the stolen $200,000 to silence the loan sharks temporarily, but the business revenue was zero. To keep up appearances, Loretta had done the unthinkable. She had quietly sold her mother's vintage jewelry collection, the pieces she had sworn would be family heirlooms, just to buy a table at this gala. Worse, she had allegedly bribed the selection committee to award Brad the title of Promising Entrepreneur of the Year. It was a desperate bid to legitimize him, to prove to the city and to herself that she hadn't bet on a loser. She had called me every day for a week, demanding my attendance. Her voicemails were a masterclass in manipulation. She told me I needed to come to show family unity. She told me I needed to come to see what real success looked like, implying that my silence over the last few months was a sign of my failure. She said if I didn't show up, I was confirming to the world that I was a bitter, jealous woman who couldn't handle her brother-in-law's brilliance. I let her believe that. I let her think I was coming to eat humble pie. I spent 4 hours in hair and makeup that afternoon, not because I wanted to look pretty, but because I wanted to look like war. I chose a dress that was not just a piece of clothing, but a weapon. It was a custom silk gown in a shade of red, so deep it looked like fresh arterial blood. It was backless, fitted to perfection, and cost more than Brad's imaginary expansion plan. David Sterling picked me up in his Bentley. He looked devastating in a tuxedo, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. He handed me a single file folder, thin and unobtrusive. "Are you ready?" he asked as we pulled up to the valet. I took the folder and slid it into my clutch. "I have been ready for 90 days, I said. "Let's go burn it down." We walked into the venue and the air changed. The room was filled with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of power. Heads turned as we entered. They weren't looking at us because we were loud. They were looking because we radiated the kind of confidence that makes people nervous. I saw the whispers start behind hands. They knew who I was. They knew the rumors about Onyx, but they didn't know the truth yet. Loretta intercepted us in the foyer before we could even reach the ballroom doors. She was wearing a gold sequined gown that was trying too hard to say old money, but screamed desperation. Her hair was piled high on her head, and she was clutching a glass of champagne like it was a grenade. When she saw me, her eyes narrowed, then widened as she took in the dress, the lawyer, and the sheer audacity of my existence. "You came," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, loud enough for the nearby groups to hear. "I am so glad you decided to put your pride aside, Zara. It takes a big person to admit when they have been bested." I looked at her coolly, not breaking my stride. "Hello, Mother. You look expensive." She preened, missing the insult. "We have to look the part. Tonight is Brad's big night. He is receiving the award. Can you believe it? After only 3 months at the helm, he is being recognized by the city. It just goes to show that vision matters more than micromanagement." She was taking a dig at my leadership style even now, standing on the edge of a precipice. "I believe it," I said, my voice flat. "Brad certainly has a unique way of doing business." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "Don't you dare cause a scene, Zara. You are here to clap. You are here to smile. You are here to show everyone that there is no bad blood. If you try anything, I will have security throw you out. Brad is a respected man now. He saved that company after you abandoned it." I smiled, a slow, dangerous curving of my lips that made her step back involuntarily. "I wouldn't dream of ruining Brad's moment, Mom," I said. "I want everyone to see exactly who he is." She seemed satisfied with that, or maybe she was just too deluded to see the threat. She shooed us toward the ballroom, telling us our seats were at table 19. Table 19 was in the back near the kitchen doors. It was a final petty insult. She wanted me there, but she wanted me in the nosebleeds. David and I ignored her directions. We didn't go to table 19. We walked straight to the front row, to the table reserved for the diamond sponsors. The usher tried to stop us checking his list, but David simply whispered something in his ear and slipped him a card. The usher's eyes widened, and he immediately pulled out 2 chairs. We sat down directly in the line of sight of the podium. The lights dimmed, and the program began. I sat through the appetizers and the speeches, my eyes fixed on the stage. I saw Chantel sitting at the head table 2 tables over. She looked nervous, picking at her nails. She knew the finances were a lie, even if she didn't know about the theft. She knew they were living on borrowed time. Brad, however, looked like he was on top of the world. He was laughing too loudly, slapping backs, drinking heavily. He thought he had pulled it off. Finally, the moment arrived. The host, a local news anchor with perfect teeth, announced the award for Promising Entrepreneur. A video montage played on the massive LED screens behind the stage. It showed stock footage of skyscrapers and diverse business meetings with the Onyx Events logo superimposed over them. It was a joke. A third grader could have made it. Then Brad walked onto the stage. The applause was polite but sparse, mostly coming from my mother's table. He adjusted the microphone and beamed out at the audience. He looked sweaty under the stage lights, his tuxedo fitting poorly around the shoulders. "Thank you," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "This is such an honor. When I took over Onyx Events 3 months ago, it was in chaos. It lacked direction. It lacked heart. I knew I had a mountain to climb." I felt David stiffen beside me, but I placed a hand on his arm. "Wait for it." Brad continued gaining confidence as he fed on his own lies. "I did this for my family. For my beautiful wife Chantel, who is the backbone of my success. For my children who are my inspiration. Family is everything. Sacrifice is everything. I had to make tough decisions. I had to cut the dead wood to let the forest grow. But we did it. We expanded internationally. We brought innovation to Atlanta. And this award proves that when you lead with integrity, the world notices." Integrity. The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. He was talking about integrity while wearing a watch bought with stolen funds, standing on a stage paid for by his mother-in-law's pawned heirlooms. It was the perfect encapsulation of my family's philosophy style: over substance, lies over truth. He raised the crystal trophy above his head, basking in the scattered applause. My mother was standing up, clapping frantically, trying to incite a standing ovation that wasn't happening. Chantel was smiling, a frozen, terrified rictus. The host returned to the stage, clapping Brad on the back. "Thank you, Brad." Inspiring words, truly inspiring. Brad moved to leave the stage, but the host stopped him. "One moment, Brad. Before you go, we have a bit of a surprise tonight." Brad froze. He looked confused. This wasn't in the script. The host turned to the audience, his smile tightening just a fraction. "As many of you know, the Black Legacy Gala relies on the support of our generous sponsors. Our diamond sponsor for the past 5 years has been Onyx Events." Brad nodded, puffing his chest out again. "Yes, that is us." However, the host continued, his voice dropping a register due to unforeseen financial circumstances. "Onyx Events defaulted on their sponsorship commitment 48 hours ago." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. Brad's face went pale. He looked at Loretta, who had stopped clapping and was staring at the stage with her mouth open. They hadn't paid the bill. They had spent the money on the award but forgot to pay for the sponsorship package that actually kept the lights on. But the host said, his voice brightening, "We were saved at the 11th hour. A new company stepped in to cover the deficit and ensure this night could continue. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new diamond sponsor of the Black Legacy Gala and the fastest-growing luxury firm in the Southeast, Z-Lux." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Then a few people gasped. The logo on the giant screen behind Brad flickered and changed. The jagged, amateurish onyx logo disappeared, replaced by the sleek gold and black monogram of Z-Lux, my new company. I stood up. The red silk of my dress rustled like a warning shot. David stood with me, offering his arm. I didn't walk to the stairs at the side of the stage. I walked to the center steps, the ones reserved for royalty. Brad was paralyzed. He stood there, clutching his trophy, looking like a deer in the headlights of a semi-truck. He saw me approaching. He saw the dress. He saw the look in my eyes. And for the first time since he married my sister, he looked truly terrified. I ascended the stairs, my eyes locked on his. The sound of my heels on the wooden stage echoed through the microphone. I reached the podium, and the host, looking slightly terrified himself, handed me the mic. I turned to face the crowd of 500 people. I saw the senator in the third row. I saw Jada Williams in the VIP box. I saw my mother standing frozen at her table, her hands clutching her throat. "Thank you," I said, my voice clear and steady, ringing through the hall without a tremor. It is an honor to step in and save this beautiful event. I know a thing or two about saving things that others have broken. I turned slowly to face Brad. He was trembling now. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "Congratulations on your award, Brad," I said, my voice dripping with cold honey. "You spoke so movingly about integrity, about sacrifice, about family. I was so touched that I wanted to give you a gift. A gift to commemorate your unique contribution to the business world." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the file folder. I didn't open it yet. I just held it up. "It is called Truth," I said. "And unlike your expansion plans, it is 100% real." I signaled to the tech booth at the back of the room. I had paid the AV guy $500 an hour ago to swap the inputs. The screen behind us flashed. The Z-Lux logo disappeared. In its place, a document appeared projected 20 feet high in high definition. It was a bank withdrawal slip, dated 3 months ago, amount $200,000. Signature Zara Henderson. But below it, in a blown-up inset, was a biometric analysis report. Signature match, probability 0%. Forgery detected. The crowd gasped. It was a collective sound of shock that sucked the air out of the room. Brad dropped the trophy. It hit the floor with a heavy thud and shattered, sending crystal shards skittering across the stage. He made a noise, a strangled whimper. "I am not done," I said into the mic. I signaled again. The screen changed. This time, it was a video. It was grainy security footage from the Buckhead Bank branch. It showed Brad sweating at the counter, handing the forged slip to the teller. It showed him looking over his shoulder nervously. It showed him taking the cashier's check and stuffing it into his jacket pocket. I turned back to the audience. "You said you cut the dead wood, Brad. You said you modernized the company. Is that what we call grand larceny now? Is that the new corporate strategy? Stealing from the trust fund of the woman who built the roof over your head?" Loretta screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that tore through the tension. She collapsed into her chair, fainting dead away, or pretending to. Otis was fanning her, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Chantel was standing up, screaming something unintelligible, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. Brad looked for an exit. He looked at the wings of the stage. He took a step backward. "I wouldn't run if I were you," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. From the shadows of the stage wings, 4 men in suits emerged. They weren't gala security. They were Atlanta Police Department Economic Crimes Unit. David had arranged their timing perfectly. They walked onto the stage, their badges catching the light. Brad Henderson, one of the officers, said, his voice amplified by the microphone I was still holding. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Please place your hands behind your back." The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like a lightning storm. People were standing up, holding their phones high, live streaming the downfall of the man who had just been crowned king. Brad started crying. He fell to his knees, begging. He looked at the audience. He looked at me. "She let me do it," he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She knew. She authorized it." I leaned into the mic one last time. "I authorized the truth. Brad," I said. "I just let you sign your name to it." The officers hauled him up. They cuffed him right there on center stage next to the shattered remains of his trophy. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming about his rights, I looked down at my family. My mother was being revived with smelling salts. My father was holding his head in his hands. Chantel was trying to fight her way through the crowd toward the stage, but was being held back by security. I looked at them, and I felt nothing. No pity, no regret. Just the cold, clean feeling of a debt finally settled. I looked at the crowd. Family is everything. "Isn't it, Mom?" I said into the silence that followed the arrest. Then I dropped the mic. It hit the floor with a dull thud. I turned and walked off the stage, David falling in step beside me. We walked straight out the back exit, leaving the chaos, the screaming, and the ruins of Onyx Events behind us. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in 3 months I took a deep breath that didn't hurt. The empire had fallen, and I was the only one left standing. The screen behind me did not go dark after the initial reveal of the forged withdrawal slip, because I had curated this presentation with the same meticulous attention to detail I used for my million-dollar weddings. I raised my hand slightly, a signal to the tech team in the back of the room. The image shifted instantly. The first slide was a series of screenshots from a dark web forum and text messages that David's investigators had unearthed. They were grainy but legible on the massive 4K display. They showed Brad's communication with known illegal bookmakers. The amounts were staggering: 50,000, 100,000. There were messages threatening his physical safety, messages promising payment as soon as the family money came through. The audience murmured, a low wave of unease moving through the room. This wasn't just white-collar crime. This was dirty. This was dangerous. Then the screen changed again. This image was a high-resolution scan of a legal document that made the air leave the room, a foreclosure notice. The address listed was 4598 Maple Drive, my parents' home. The house I had paid off for them 5 years ago. The house they had leveraged to fund Brad's gambling addiction under the guise of an international expansion that never existed. I looked down at Otis. He was squinting at the screen, his glasses sliding down his nose. I saw the moment the realization hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at Loretta, who was just waking up from her initial shock only to be plunged into a fresh nightmare. She hadn't known about the foreclosure. Brad had intercepted the mail. He had hidden the notices. He had let them live in a house that didn't belong to them anymore. The final video played. It was the security footage from the bank. It showed Brad at the counter, his hand shaking as he signed my name. It showed him looking over his shoulder, terrified. It showed him taking the cashier's check and kissing it before stuffing it into his jacket pocket. It was undeniable proof of theft played on a loop for 500 of Atlanta's most influential people. I didn't have to say a word. The evidence spoke volumes about the man they had just crowned king. The reaction in the ballroom was visceral. It wasn't just polite shock, it was horror. These were people who valued reputation above all else, and they were watching a prominent family disintegrate in high definition. Loretta made a sound that I will never forget. It was a low, keening wail like an animal in a trap. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and this time there was no acting involved. She crumpled sideways, her gold-sequined dress pooling around her like molten metal. Otis caught her, but he was barely standing himself. He looked at the screen, then at Brad, then at his unconscious wife. He looked like a man whose entire reality had just been revealed as a hologram. Chantel was not fainting. She was screaming. She pushed past a security guard, her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "You witch!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me from the base of the stage. "You did this! You ruined us! You jealous, hateful witch!" She threw her glass of champagne at the stage. It shattered against the wooden risers, spraying glass and liquid near my feet. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at her calmly, my expression unreadable. She was screaming about loyalty, but she was standing in the wreckage of her own greed. Brad was the most pathetic of them all. All the color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure left out in the sun. He looked at the screen where his crime was playing on a loop. He looked at the exits. I saw his muscles tense. He was going to run. He took a step toward the back curtain, his eyes darting like a trapped rat. He thought he could slip out the back door and disappear into the night, leaving his wife and my parents to clean up the mess. He didn't make it 2 steps. From the shadows of the wings, 4 officers from the Atlanta Police Department's Economic Crimes Unit stepped into the light. They weren't wearing tactical gear. They were in suits, crisp and professional, just like David Sterling had promised. They moved with efficient purpose, blocking every exit route Brad had just calculated. Brad Henderson, one of the detectives, boomed, his voice projected by the microphone I had left on the podium. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny." Brad froze. He looked at the officers, then at the audience, then at me. The handcuffs came out. The metal glinted under the stage lights. As they grabbed his arms, Brad broke. He didn't just cry, he howled. It wasn't me, he screamed, struggling against the officer's grip. I didn't want to do it. She told me to. He pointed a shaking finger into the crowd, not at me, at the unconscious form of my mother who was being fanned by a waiter. She told me it was okay, he yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. She said Zara owed us. She said taking the money was just taking what belonged to the family. She told me to sign the check. She said she would cover for me. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Chantel stopped screaming. Every eye turned to Loretta. Brad had just hammered the final nail into her coffin. He hadn't just stolen. He had implicated the matriarch. He had revealed that the rot didn't start with him. It started at the head of the table. My mother had authorized the theft of her own daughter's money to save her vanity project. I watched as they dragged him away, his accusations echoing in the vaulted ceiling. I looked at David. He nodded once. The job was done. I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the microphone, the screen, and my family's reputation lying in the dirt. I didn't look back at them. There was nothing left to see. The truth was out, and it was uglier than anyone could have imagined. The week following the Black Legacy Gala was not a slow fade into obscurity for the Henderson family, but rather a violent and public crash that Atlanta would talk about for years. 7 days after Brad was led away in handcuffs, the Fulton County Sheriff's Department arrived at the Colonial Mansion on Maple Drive. They did not come with sirens, but their presence was loud enough. 2 deputies stood on the porch while a team from the bank began cataloging the property. The foreclosure process, which Brad had hidden and ignored, had reached its terminal phase. Because of the fraudulent nature of the loans and the sheer scale of the debt, the bank had successfully petitioned for an expedited eviction. I wasn't there to see it, but my network is vast, and in the South, bad news travels faster than a summer storm. I heard that Loretta tried to bar the door. She stood on the threshold wearing her Sunday best, screaming that this was a mistake, that her son-in-law was a businessman who was simply resolving a clerical error. The deputies were not impressed. They gave her and Otis exactly 2 hours to pack their personal effects. 2 hours to condense 40 years of life into a few suitcases. They couldn't take the furniture. They couldn't take the art. They couldn't take the grand piano that Loretta had never learned to play, but insisted on having for appearances. Those were assets of the estate, now property of the creditors. The neighbors watched from behind twitching curtains. Sister Patterson, the head usher at their church, drove by 3 times in her sedan, slowing down to get a good look at the piles of Louis Vuitton luggage sitting forlornly on the curb. The humiliation was absolute. The image of the Henderson matriarch being escorted off her own property, clutching a Bible and a jewelry box that was mostly empty because she had pawned the good stuff, was burned into the neighborhood's collective memory. At the same time, across town, the headquarters of Onyx Events was being dismantled. The landlord had locked the doors 3 days prior due to non-payment of rent. A notice of bankruptcy was taped to the glass. The employees had already left, scrambling to find new jobs or calling me to beg for positions at Z-Lux. I hired the good ones, the ones who had done the work while Brad played CEO. The rest were left to drift. The company that I had built from scratch, that had hosted governors and celebrities, was gone. It didn't die a noble death. It was strangled by incompetence and greed, leaving behind nothing but a mountain of unpaid invoices and a legacy of fraud. My parents sat on the curb waiting for an Uber because their cars had been repossessed that morning. They looked like refugees from a war they had started but didn't know how to fight. They had no home, no car, no money, and for the first time in their lives, no one to impress. The destination for the Uber was not a hotel because they had no credit cards that would clear. It was an apartment complex on the south side of the city, a place called The Bluffs. It was where Chantel had moved 3 days ago after Brad's arrest. The lease on their rented townhouse had been in Brad's name, and when the arrest warrant went public, the landlord exercised a morality clause to evict her immediately. With zero income and her husband facing federal charges, Chantel had no options. She scraped together the last of her cash to rent a two-bedroom unit in a building where the elevator was broken, and the hallways smelled of cabbage and despair. When Loretta and Otis dragged their designer suitcases up the 3 flights of stairs, they found a scene that was a far cry from the luxury they felt entitled to. The apartment was cramped and dark with peeling paint and a view of a dumpster. Chantel was sitting on a stained beige sofa, nursing one of the twins while the other screamed in a playpen. She looked haggard, her hair was unkempt, her makeup non-existent. She wasn't the princess anymore. She was a single mother with a husband in jail and a mountain of debt she couldn't pay. The moment Loretta walked in, the air in the small room turned poisonous. There was no tearful reunion. There was no comfort. There was only blame. It started when Otis tried to put his suitcase in the corner and knocked over a stack of unpaid bills. "Watch what you are doing, old man," Chantel snapped, her voice shrill with stress. "I don't have space for your mess. I barely have space for my kids." Loretta bristled. She smoothed her skirt, trying to summon her lost dignity. "Do not speak to your father that way, Chantel. We are guests here until we get our situation sorted." "Guests?" Chantel laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You are not guests. You are homeless. Just like me. Because you listened to him. You listened to Brad." "I listened to him," Loretta shouted back. "Because you said he was a genius. You said he was going to take us global. You sat there eating the food Zara paid for, and told me your husband was the future. He is your son-in-law." Chantel screamed, standing up and startling the baby she was holding. "You signed the papers, Mom. You signed the mortgage. You gave him the house. You were so desperate to look rich that you didn't even read the contract. Do not put this on me." Loretta pointed a shaking finger at her daughter. "I did it for you. I did it so you could have the life Zara wouldn't give you. Zara is the villain here. She orchestrated this. She trapped us." Otis, who had been standing by the window looking out at the bleak parking lot, finally turned around. His shoulders were slumped, his face gray and defeated. "Zara didn't sign the papers, Loretta," he said, his voice quiet but cutting through the screaming match. "Zara didn't forge the check. Zara didn't gamble the money. We did. We got greedy." "You shut up," Loretta hissed, turning her fury on him. "You sat there like a lump for 30 years letting me do all the work. If you had been a better provider, I wouldn't have had to rely on Brad. If you had been a real man, we wouldn't be in this mess." Otis looked at his wife with a look of pure disgust. "I was a real man. I provided a home. I provided stability. It wasn't enough for you. You wanted to be a queen. Well, look around, Loretta. Here is your castle." The argument raged for hours, a circular firing squad of resentment and denial. They screamed until their voices were hoarse, until the neighbors banged on the walls, until the babies cried themselves to sleep. They were trapped in that tiny box, with their failures forced to look at each other and see exactly what they had become. There was no money to fix it. There was no status to hide behind. There was just the ugly truth, and it was suffocating them. 2 days later, my office phone rang. My personal assistant, a sharp young woman named Keisha, who I had poached from a competitor, buzzed me. "It is your father," she said. "He says it is an emergency. He sounds bad." I looked at the phone. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew David would tell me to let it go to voicemail. But curiosity is a powerful drug. I picked up. Zara Otis's voice was unrecognizable. It was cracked and thin like dry parchment. "Zara, please don't hang up." I didn't say anything. I just listened to the sound of his breathing. We are in trouble," he stammered. "Real trouble. Your mother, she is sick. She can't breathe in this place. The mold. It is affecting her chest. And the babies. Zara. They don't have diapers. Chantel has no money. Sell the suitcases." I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Sell the clothes. You have thousands of dollars in designer gear sitting in that apartment. Use it." "We tried," he sobbed. "The pawn shops. They give us pennies. It isn't enough for rent. We are going to be on the street, Zara. Your own parents, your nieces and nephews. You should have thought about that before you signed the mortgage, Dad, I said. You should have thought about that before you watched Brad steal from me and said nothing. I know he wept openly now, a sound that was pathetic and grating. I know we were wrong. I was weak. But please, we are blood. You have so much. You have millions. Just a little. Just enough to get us a small house, a condo, anything. We will pay you back. I will work. You will work, I asked. Doing what, Dad? You are 65 with a bankruptcy on your record. I will do anything. Please, baby girl, be the bigger person. The Bible says to forgive. Your mother is suffering. You can't be this cruel. You can't let us rot here. I swiveled my chair around to look out at the city. From up here, the world looked orderly and clean. Down there in the bluffs, it was messy. He was trying to use my morality against me, trying to leverage the very virtues he had failed to instill. I am not cruel, Dad, I said. I am just a businesswoman, and I don't make bad investments. Giving you money is a bad investment. You burn everything you touch. Zara, please. Stop begging, I cut him off. It is embarrassing. You want a solution. You want a way out. Yes. Yes, anything. Fine, I said. I checked my calendar. I have a window tomorrow morning. You, Mom, and Chantel. Be at my office at 9 a.m. sharp. We will be there. Thank you, Zara. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, I said, my voice turning to ice. And Dad, do not be late. If you are 1 minute past 9, the security guards will not let you up. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. It was the final move. The checkmate. I picked up my intercom. Keisha, I said. Call the legal department. I need the deed for the Maple Drive property. The one I bought from the bank this morning. And call the shelter director. Tell her I have found her new staff. I leaned back in my chair. They wanted a house. They wanted jobs. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. But as with everything in life, the devil was in the details. And I was the one writing the contract now. At 9 o'clock sharp, the elevator doors to the penthouse suite of Z Lux slid open with a soft chime. My assistant Keisha was waiting at the reception desk, her face a mask of professional indifference, though I knew she was secretly enjoying the spectacle. I watched from the monitor in my office as my family stepped into the lobby. They looked like ghosts of the people they used to be. Otis was wearing a suit that was wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame, his eyes darting around the opulent space like a frightened animal. Chantel had the twins in a double stroller that looked battered, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that wasn't a style choice, but a necessity. And Loretta, my mother, who had once terrorized waitstaff for bringing her tap water instead of sparkling, looked small. Her designer clothes were gone, replaced by a mismatched outfit that I recognized from the clearance rack at a discount store. They walked toward the glass doors of my inner sanctum, treading carefully on the plush carpet as if they were afraid they might dirty it. I spun my chair around to face the window, composing my features into a mask of absolute neutrality. I heard the door open. I heard the shuffle of feet. I heard the heavy breathing of people who were carrying the weight of the world on their backs. Please sit, I said without turning around. They didn't sit. I heard a thud followed by another. I turned my chair slowly. Otis and Loretta were on their knees. They were kneeling on the Persian rug right in the center of my office. Chantel stood behind them, clutching the handle of the stroller, her knuckles white. Zara Otis rasped his hands clasped together in a posture of prayer. We are begging you. Please. We have nowhere else to go. The shelter it is dangerous. Your mother is scared. We are scared. Loretta looked up at me. Her face was ravaged by stress and lack of sleep. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic hunger. Baby girl, she whispered, using a nickname she hadn't used since I was 6. I am sorry. I am so sorry. We made a mistake. We know that now. But we are family. You can't let us live like animals. I looked at them, and I felt a flicker of memory. I remembered kneeling on the floor of my bedroom when I was 22, begging them to co-sign a small loan so I wouldn't lose my first apartment. They had laughed then. They had told me that struggle builds character. Chantel pushed the stroller forward. One of the twins started to whimper. "Look at them, Zara," she said, her voice cracking. "These are your blood, your niece and nephew. They are sleeping on a mattress on the floor in a room full of mold. Brad left us with nothing. No money, no diapers. Do you hate me so much that you want them to suffer? Do you want to see them on the street?" She was using the children again, just like I knew she would. But this time the threat wasn't abstract. It was real. They were dirty. They looked hungry. The guilt she was trying to weaponize was sharp, but my resolve was sharper. I stood up and walked around the desk. I stopped a few feet away from where my parents were kneeling. "Get up," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You are embarrassing yourselves. We won't get up until you help us," Otis sobbed. "Just the house, Zara. That is all we ask. Buy back the house. Let us live there. We will pay rent when we can. We just need to go home." "Home," I repeated. "You signed home away, Dad. You gambled it on a crypto scam because you thought you were too good to work for it." "We know," Loretta wailed, reaching out to grab the hem of my dress. I stepped back. "We know we were fools. But we learned our lesson. Please, just give us a chance to be a family again." I looked at Keisha, who was standing by the door ready to call security. I held up a hand. "Not yet." I walked back to my desk and picked up a thick document bound in blue legal paper. I held it up so they could see it. "This is the deed to 4598 Maple Drive," I said. The room went silent. Loretta stopped crying. Otis looked up, hope flooding his face so bright it was painful to watch. Chantel let out a breath she had been holding. "You bought it," Loretta whispered, her eyes fixed on the paper like it was the Holy Grail. "You saved it. Oh, thank God. Thank God. I knew you wouldn't let us down. I knew you still loved us." She started to scramble to her feet, wiping her tears, ready to embrace me, ready to step back into her role as the matriarch of the house I had paid for. She thought the nightmare was over. She thought she had won. I laid the deed flat on the desk and placed my hand over it. "Sit down, Mother," I said. She froze halfway up. "What do you mean?" I said, "Sit down." She sank back onto her knees, confusion clouding her face. "I did buy the house," I said. "I wired the money to the bank this morning. It is fully paid off. It is legally mine." "Thank you." Otis wept, his head bowing until it touched the carpet. "Thank you, Zara. We will be the best tenants. You won't even know we are there." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You won't be tenants, Dad." They looked at me blankly. "I didn't buy the house for you," I said, my voice hard as diamonds. "I bought it for the community." Loretta's mouth opened. "What?" I picked up a second document. "This is a transfer of ownership agreement. An hour ago I signed the property over to the Atlanta Women's and Families Shelter." Chantel gasped. "The shelter?" "Yes," I continued. "I have endowed the property to be used as a transitional housing facility for single mothers and elderly people who have lost their homes due to financial abuse and fraud. It seemed fitting given the circumstances of how it was lost." But we can live there, right?" Loretta asked, her voice trembling. "We are homeless. We qualify." I nodded slowly. "You do qualify. Technically. But here's the thing about this shelter, Mom. It has rules, strict rules. It is not a free ride." I picked up the shelter handbook and started reading. Rule number 1. Residents must apply through the central intake system. There is a waiting list. You will have to get in line behind the people who have been sleeping in their cars for months. Rule number 2. Residents must participate in mandatory financial literacy classes and job training. Rule number 3. There is a 10 p.m. curfew. No alcohol, no guests, and certainly no parties. I looked at them. "You can apply today," I said. "I can put in a good word with the director to make sure your application is reviewed quickly." But you will not be the owners. You will not be the masters of the house. You will be residents in a bunk room sharing a kitchen and a bathroom with 3 other families. Loretta looked like she had been slapped. A bunk room, she whispered. In my own house. It is not your house anymore, Mom, I reminded her. It belongs to the people who actually need it. The people who didn't gamble their security away out of greed. But the furniture, Otis asked weakly. Our things. The shelter comes furnished, I said. Your luxury furniture will be auctioned off to pay for the operating costs. You will get a bed, a locker, and 3 meals a day. It is more than you have right now. Chantel stepped forward, pushing the stroller aggressively. You can't do this, Zara. You can't make us live in a shelter in our childhood home. It is cruel. It is sick. It is charity, I corrected. I am giving you a roof over your heads. I am giving you a chance to get back on your feet. That is what you asked for, isn't it? Help. We wanted our lives back, Chantel hissed. We wanted our dignity. You sold your dignity when you helped your husband steal from me, I said. My eyes flashing. You sold it when you called me a thief while living off my hard work. Dignity is earned, Chantel. It is not a gift. I looked at the twins sleeping in the stroller. But I am not a monster. I know those babies need stability. I picked up a final piece of paper. It was an employment contract. I spoke to the director of the shelter this morning, I said, looking at Chantel. They are understaffed. They need people who are willing to do the hard work, the dirty work that keeps the place running. I held the contract out to her. They have an opening for a custodial staff member, I said. Chantel stared at the paper. Custodial. You mean a janitor? I mean someone who scrubs the toilets, mops the floors, and changes the sheets, I said. It pays $15 an hour. It is minimum wage, but it comes with full health benefits for you and the children. And it comes with a guaranteed spot in the family housing unit so you don't have to wait in line. You want me to clean toilets in the house where I grew up? Chantel asked, her voice shaking with rage and humiliation. I want you to work for your living, I said. You said you needed to feed your kids. You said you needed diapers. This job pays every 2 weeks. It is honest work, Chantel. It is more honest than anything Brad ever did. I looked at Loretta and Otis. And if you want to stay there with her, you will have to contribute too. The shelter needs volunteers for the kitchen. You can peel potatoes, Mom. You can wash dishes, Dad. It will teach you the value of labor. Loretta stood up, her knees cracking. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. I will never forgive you for this, she spat. You are enjoying this. You are laughing at us. I am not laughing, I said, leaning back in my chair. I am solving a problem. You have no home. I provided one. You have no job. I found one. If that is not enough for you, then you are welcome to leave. The street is right outside. Chantel looked at her mother, then at the babies, then at the contract. She was trapped. She had no money, no husband, and no options. Her pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She snatched the paper from my hand. I will take it, she whispered. Her head hung low. I will take the job. Good, I said. Report to the shelter manager at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Do not be late, and wear comfortable shoes. It is a big house to clean. I looked at Keisha. Show them out. My parents struggled to their feet. Otis looked back at me, tears streaming down his face. Zara, please. Goodbye, Dad, I said, turning my chair to face the window. I heard them shuffling out. I heard the stroller wheels squeaking on the marble. I heard the heavy glass doors close behind them, sealing them out of my world and into the reality they had created. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Atlanta lay spread out before me, a grid of lights and ambition. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was cold, but it tasted like victory. I watched as 3 small figures emerged from the building lobby onto the sidewalk below. They looked like ants from this height, insignificant and small. They stood on the corner arguing for a moment before turning and walking slowly toward the bus stop. They were going to the shelter. They were going to survive. But they were never going to hurt me again. My desk phone rang, cutting through the silence. I glanced at the caller ID. It was a Washington, D.C. area code. I picked up the receiver. "This is Zara," Ms. Henderson, a deep voice said. "This is Senator Vance." I smiled. The lawsuit must have been dropped, or perhaps he just realized that Z-Lux was the only game in town. "Senator," I said smoothly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I wanted to apologize for the unpleasantness at the wedding. The senator said, his voice respectful. "You handled that situation with remarkable poise, and the way you turned that gala around. Well, it has been the talk of the Capitol." "I appreciate that, Senator," I said. "We have a situation," he continued, lowering his voice. "The president-elect is looking for a new lead coordinator for the inaugural ball. The previous planner, well, let's just say they didn't have your attention to detail. We need someone who can handle pressure, someone who can handle a crisis, someone who isn't afraid to make the hard calls." I looked out at the city, at the world I had conquered. "I think I can fit you in," I said. "Excellent," the senator said. "Can you be in D.C. tomorrow?" "I will be there," I said. I hung up the phone. The screen of my life went dark on the past and lit up with the future. I was Zara Henderson. I was the queen of this city. And I was just getting started. The most powerful lesson from Zara's journey is that your self-worth is never negotiable, not even for family. Loyalty cannot be demanded. It must be earned through respect. When we finally stop trying to buy the love of those who only view us as a resource, we create space for true success and peace. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It is essential self-preservation. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself and build the life you truly deserve. If you have ever had to choose your peace over your family's toxic expectations, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice.